At my sister's wedding, in front of 200 guests, my father took the microphone and called me the family disgrace. Not in those exact words. He never used those exact words. He was too practiced for that. He had spent a lifetime learning how to say difficult things in ways that made them sound like love. But by the time he finished, every person in that room knew exactly what he meant. The caterers knew. The pastor knew. The woman who had been refilling the water glasses near the back knew. And so did the man my sister had married, about 4 hours earlier, who was standing at the front of the room with a champagne glass in his hand and an expression on his face that I will never forget. I didn't stand up. I didn't cry. I didn't say a single word. I sat completely still, with my hands in my lap, and I waited for him to finish. Then I reached into my clutch, looked down at my phone, and I read the one text that told me exactly what to do next. Before I tell you what that text said and who sent it, I want to ask you to please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Drop your city and the time it is where you are in the comments below. I love knowing where in the world you're listening from. And I want you to stay with me, because this story gets to places I did not expect. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in a house where everything looked right from the outside. We lived in a mid-sized town in the South. The kind of town where people know your last name before they know you. Where the same families sit in the same pews every Sunday, and someone's grandmother can still tell you who your grandmother was, and what she was like, and whether the apple fell far from the tree. My father's name is Gerald. He ran a small commercial printing business for 30 years. Not a large company, but stable, respected. His name appeared in the local paper a few times a year, sponsoring a little league team, donating to the school fundraiser. He had the kind of reputation that comes from consistency, not from greatness. And he wore it carefully. Like a good suit he had learned not to take off in public. My mother's name is Diane. She managed the household the way other people manage projects, with systems, with schedules, with a quiet authority that didn't need to announce itself. She was warm to visitors. Organized at church. She remembered everyone's birthday and sent a card every single year without fail. To the outside world, she was the kind of woman you called dependable. Gracious. A good wife and a good mother. I am the older daughter. My name is Nora. My sister's name is Claire. She is 2 years younger than me. She was, from very early on, the one who moved through this family without friction. She chose the right schools, the right interests. She was quieter than me, less likely to push back, more likely to ask what was needed and then do it. My parents found her easy to understand. I think that was the word they would have used. Easy. I was not easy. Not because I was wild or reckless or unkind. I was none of those things. I was just someone who had her own ideas about things. Who asked too many questions. Who changed direction when the direction she was going stopped making sense to her. Who left situations that weren't right for her, even when leaving was inconvenient, even when leaving made someone else uncomfortable. In this family, that was called stubbornness. Difficulty. A character flaw that could never quite be fixed, no matter how many years passed. There is always a version of the family story where what happened was not deliberate. Where it was simply two different personalities, two different paths, and the natural friction that comes from that. I have spent a long time trying to believe that version. I am going to tell you 3 things, and then you can decide for yourself what version feels true. The first one happened when I was 14. There was a community ceremony at our church, a recognition event for young people who had completed a service program that year. Claire and I had both participated. We had both done the same number of hours. We had both, by every measure, completed the same program. At the reception afterward, my father introduced us to a group of his friends and colleagues who had attended. He put his arm around Claire's shoulder while he spoke. He mentioned her name twice. He said she had been remarkable. Then he gestured at me. He said, "This is Nora," and moved on. I was 14. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Parents get distracted. He was talking to people. I had been standing slightly to the side. I believed that for a while. The second thing happened when I was 24. I had been working at a marketing firm for 2 years, a job I had gotten on my own, in a city 3 hours from home. I was offered a position at a smaller company doing something I actually wanted to do. The pay was less. The title was lower. But the work was mine in a way the first job had never been. I called my mother to tell her. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, "Claire would never do something like this." Not as an accusation. She said it the way someone states a fact. Evenly. Like she was simply noting a difference between two things. She wasn't wrong. Claire wouldn't have. Claire had taken a stable position at a local firm right out of college and stayed there, and that was the right choice for Claire. But I was not Claire. And the way my mother said it made it clear that Claire's way was the right way, and my way was, by contrast, something she had to find a diplomatic phrase for. The third thing happened 2 years before the wedding. At a family dinner, my father was telling his friends about his daughters. He spoke about Claire for about 3 minutes, her job, her relationship with Daniel, a trip she had taken that summer. He was specific, warm, visibly proud. Then he turned to me. And he said, "And this is Nora. She keeps us on our toes." The table laughed. He laughed. I smiled, because I had learned to smile. Keeps us on our toes. I thought about that phrase for a long time afterward. About what it said about how he saw me. A source of suspense. A variable. Something you needed to brace for, rather than rely on. 3 things. You can decide what they add up to. Claire met Daniel at a work conference. He was steady, thoughtful, employed in a field everyone respected. He was genuinely kind. I want to say that plainly, because the kindness matters to this story. Daniel was a good man. My problem was never with him. When they got engaged, my parents hosted a dinner to celebrate. Everyone came. Extended family, close friends, people from the church. There were flowers on the table that my mother had arranged herself. There was good wine and a meal she had spent 2 days cooking. Near the end of the evening, my father stood up to give a toast. It was 4 minutes long. I remember because I counted. He spoke about Claire's character, her patience, her loyalty, her kindness. He spoke about what it had meant to raise her. His voice broke slightly on one sentence, and the room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when someone is being genuinely moved. I sat at that table and I watched my father feel something that deeply, and I thought, he is capable of this. This is inside him. He can feel this way about his daughter. I did not let myself finish that thought. But it was there. Later that evening, I stepped out to the kitchen to help clear some things, and I heard my mother and my aunt talking in the hallway just outside. Their voices were low. They were not being careless. They simply didn't know I was there. I only caught part of it. My aunt said something I couldn't fully hear. And my mother said, in a voice I recognized, quiet, certain, "Nora makes everything harder than it needs to be. It's always been this way." I stood at the sink with a dish in my hand for a moment. Then I put it down, dried my hands, and went back to the table. I didn't tell anyone what I had heard. I filed it away the way you file things you don't know what to do with yet. I didn't know yet that I would need it. Claire and Daniel set a date for the following June. 14 months away. I was asked to be a bridesmaid. Our cousin Jess was asked to be maid of honor. My mother explained this easily. "Nora, you're so far away, it wouldn't be fair to put that kind of responsibility on you." Which was true, in the way that certain things are technically true while still being an answer to a question that was never actually asked. I said, of course. I said I was happy to help in any way I could. Over the next several months, I was CC'd on some emails and not on others. I learned about the dress fitting from Claire directly, 3 days after it happened. When I arrived at an engagement dinner in the spring, the caterer had the wrong dietary note for me, not wrong because of a mistake, wrong because the form that had been sent around didn't include me. My mother apologized. She said it must have slipped through. I said it was fine. I want to be clear about something. None of these things were large. None of them, in isolation, would have been worth raising. They were small. They were the kind of small that accumulates, quietly, over months, until you cannot ignore the shape of what it adds up to. There was one conversation I remember more specifically than the others. My mother called to go over the seating arrangements. I suggested that a few of the older relatives might be more comfortable at a table closer to the door for easier access. There was a brief silence. Then she said, "We've already decided." Not, we considered that but decided differently. Not, that's a good thought, let me check. We've already decided. I understood, very slowly, what kind of participant I was in this wedding. I was scenery. Dressed up, placed carefully, serving a function. But not someone whose input shaped the room. There was one person at those pre-wedding events who made me feel otherwise. Her name was Meg. She was Daniel's younger sister, quieter than Daniel, sharp in a way that took a little while to notice. She had been placed near me at 2 different pre-wedding gatherings, I think by coincidence, and we had ended up talking both times in ways I hadn't expected. She was a good listener. She asked questions that were actually curious rather than polite. At a rehearsal dinner the night before the wedding, she leaned over and said, "I've heard a great deal about Claire. I feel like I'm still getting to know everyone else." It was a small thing, but it sat with me. The morning of the wedding was warm. One of those early June days that starts out with a little haze and then burns it off by noon so that everything looks clean and too bright. The venue was an old estate on the outskirts of town. The kind of place with a long driveway and tall hedges and iron gates that were left open on event days. Inside, white tablecloths, tall floral arrangements, crystal that caught the afternoon light through tall windows. My parents had been planning this venue for years, long before Daniel was in the picture. My mother had driven past it on the way home from church for as long as I could remember. I arrived and followed the directions to the bridal suite to check in. Claire was seated at the mirror while someone worked on her hair. She looked up when I came in. She smiled. It was a real smile, the specific kind of relief that comes from recognizing someone familiar in a room full of organized chaos. I helped where I could. I held things. I found the coordinator when someone needed to ask a question. I stood next to Jess while she managed a small crisis involving the florist and the wrong color ribbon on the pew arrangements, and I said the right things at the right moments to help her stay calm. My mother moved through the suite with her clipboard. She thanked Jess twice. She touched my arm once, briefly, on her way out the door. The ceremony was at 4 o'clock. I was placed in the 3rd row on the family side. Not the 1st row. There were cousins in the 1st row I hadn't seen in years. I sat where I was directed, and I did not ask why. I am not going to describe the whole ceremony. It was beautiful. Claire was beautiful. Daniel looked at her the way people are supposed to look at each other during a moment like that, and the room was full of the particular kind of quiet that means everyone is holding their breath in the same direction. There was one moment I keep coming back to. When the officiant asked who gives this woman, my father stood. He said, in a full, steady voice, "Her mother and I do." I watched his face while he said it. He was looking at Claire, and there was something in his expression that I can only describe as complete. Like a man who felt, in that moment, that everything had gone the way it was supposed to go. I looked at my hands in my lap. I smoothed the fabric of my dress. I reminded myself that I was here, at this wedding, in this room, and that this was a good thing. That I had chosen to be here. I believed that, for about 4 more hours. The reception moved to the main hall. Dinner was served. The room settled into the comfortable noise of a party, the clink of silverware, low music, laughter from different corners. My table was near the side of the room. Not the back, but not near the center. Meg was seated 2 chairs away from me. Across from us, a work friend of Daniel's named Patrick who was easy to talk to, and 2 cousins from my father's side who I hadn't seen in a few years. The meal was good. The conversation at our table was easy. I had a glass of wine and I let myself relax slightly, which was something I had been working toward all day. At some point during the main course, I noticed my father moving through the room. He was working it the way he always worked a room, stopping at tables, shaking hands, touching shoulders, laughing at the right moments. He was genuinely good at this. He always had been. He had the social ease of someone who had spent decades being the person other people were glad to see. He stopped at the table next to ours. He didn't come to ours. Meg caught my eye for a moment. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me steadily, in a way that told me she had noticed too. I poured a little more water into my glass. I didn't know then that the evening had been structured very deliberately. That there was an order to things. That my father had decided, at some point in the preceding weeks, what the toasts would be, and in what order, and what he was going to say. I didn't know that the toast was last. And I didn't know that he had been saving something for last. The toasts began just before dessert. Daniel's best man went first. Funny, warm, entirely appropriate, the kind of toast that makes the room laugh twice and tear up once. Daniel looked embarrassed and pleased. Claire leaned her head on his shoulder. Then Jess, as maid of honor. Also lovely. She talked about growing up with Claire, about the specific quality of Claire's loyalty, about how lucky Daniel was. She cried a little at the end, and Claire reached out and held her hand, and the room was with them completely. Then my father stood. The room shifted. Not visibly, you would not have noticed it if you weren't paying close attention. But there was a slight change in the air when he took the microphone. He had a presence. He always had. People turned toward him without being asked to. He started with Claire. Of course he did. He talked about the day she was born. He talked about watching her grow into someone he was proud of. He talked about Daniel in warm, specific terms, called him a good man, said he was the kind of son-in-law a father hoped for. The room was smiling. I was smiling. And then he paused. He said, "A wedding is a good time to think about family. About what it means to be raised by people who love you, and what it means to carry that into the life you're building." His tone didn't change. That was the thing. His voice stayed exactly as warm as it had been. He was speaking the way someone speaks when they're saying something important. Something considered. He said, "Our family has always done things a certain way. We believe in commitment. In staying. In showing up for the people who depend on you. Claire has always understood that." He paused again. He said, "Not everyone in a family takes the same path." He looked at me when he said it. Not for long. Just long enough that the people at the tables nearest me followed his glance. He said, "Some people have to find things out on their own. They leave jobs that were good for them. They make choices that are hard on the people who love them. They go their own way, and the family waits and hopes and prays." Someone near the front of the room shifted in their chair. Someone else set down their fork. He said, "But tonight is about Claire. Tonight is about a daughter who made us proud every single day." He raised his glass. He said, "To Claire and Daniel." The room set it back. 200 people, lifting their glasses, looking at the bride and groom. I lifted my glass. My hands were steady. I have no idea how. I was counting. I always count things when I need to stay calm. I was counting the lights above the dance floor. There were 26 of them, and I was not going to cry, and I was not going to stand up, and I was not going to give him the version of me that he had just described to 200 people. I sat completely still, and I waited. The applause faded. The room exhaled and moved on the way rooms do. Someone stood up to use the restroom. Someone poured more wine. The music shifted back to something low and ambient. I did not move. I sat with my hands in my lap, and I looked at the center of the table, and I breathed very carefully. Meg said my name. Quietly, just for me. She didn't say anything else. Just my name, the way you say someone's name when you want them to know they are not invisible. I looked up. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she looked down at her phone on the table. A few seconds later, my clutch buzzed. I reached in and looked at the screen. It was from Meg. The text said, "I was recording the toasts to send to Daniel's family who couldn't be here." I got all of that. All of it clearly. "If you ever need it, it's yours. I am so sorry, Nora." I read it twice. Then I put the phone face down on the table. Then I picked it up and read it again. I want to try to explain what happened in me in that moment, because it was not the thing you might expect. It was not triumph. It was not relief, exactly. It was something quieter and stranger than either of those. It was the feeling of having a witness. I had heard those words. I had sat in that room and received what my father said, and then watched 200 people raise their glasses as if it were a toast and not a verdict. I had done it alone. And now someone else had heard it too. Someone who had no reason to protect the story. Someone who had no history with this family, no loyalty to the image, no stake in the version of events that my parents had always preferred. Meg had heard it. And she was telling me she had it. I set the phone down. I looked at the lights above the dance floor for a moment, 26 of them, still there, and then I looked at Meg. I mouthed, "Thank you." She nodded. I didn't know yet what I would do with what she had. I only knew that for the first time that evening, I was not the only person in the room who had heard the truth. And that changed something. Not loudly. Not immediately. But the change had started. I drove home alone that night. It was a tower drive, mostly highway, and I made it in the kind of silence that asks questions. The kind where the quiet is so complete that thoughts you have been managing very carefully start to come forward on their own. I thought about my father's voice. About how steady it had been. About how practiced that steadiness was. I thought about the phrase he had used, some people have to find things out on their own. I turned it over and over, the way you turn over something that has a sharp edge, looking for the part that doesn't cut. I couldn't find it. I got home around midnight. I sat in my parked car for a few minutes before going inside. The neighborhood was quiet. The house across the street still had a light on. I thought, I have made my peace with my family 100 times. I have decided 100 times that the relationship was worth the cost of showing up for it. I have driven 2 hours. I have smiled. I have stood in a blue dress in a room where I was meant to be a prop, and I have done it with grace, and I have believed that grace was a virtue worth practicing. I went inside. I left my shoes by the door. I poured a glass of water and stood in my kitchen in my dress for a while, and I did not cry, and I did not call anyone, and I did not do anything except stand there and think. Something had shifted. I could feel the shape of it without yet knowing what it was. The next morning, the family group chat came back to life. Wedding photos from people's phones. Someone had taken a picture of the cake. Someone else posted a photo of Claire and Daniel at the reception laughing. My aunt wrote, "What a beautiful evening." My mother responded with a heart. My cousin Jess shared 3 photos from the bridal suite. I was in 2 of the photos from the reception. Both times, I was in the background. I did not respond to the group chat for 3 days. For the first 2 days, no one noticed. I want to say that again, because it is important. For 2 full days, in a family group chat that was actively busy with conversation, no one noticed that I was not in it. On day 3, my cousin posted something directly at me, tagging my name in a photo caption, something light and cheerful. I responded. The conversation continued. Everything proceeded normally. Normal. I had been calling it that for a long time. My mother called on the 4th day after the wedding. She did not call to talk about the toast. She called to ask if I had reached out to Claire to thank her for including me in the wedding party. She said Claire had worked very hard, and that she hoped I had made sure Claire knew I appreciated being part of the day. I said yes. I had thanked her. I had not. But I would, and the small deception felt inconsequential next to the larger one that was still sitting in my chest from 4 days ago. We spoke for about 8 minutes. She told me about the flowers at the venue, which she had apparently told the florist should have been done differently. She told me she was tired from the week. She asked how the drive home had been. She did not mention the toast. She did not ask how I was. When we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. I thought about the word oversight. About the distance between something being an oversight and something being a choice. About how long I had been giving my family the benefit of the doubt on that particular question. Meg texted 3 days after the wedding. Just checking in. Hope you're okay. I waited a day before I responded. Not because I didn't want to, because I was still figuring out what I wanted to say. We ended up on the phone for almost an hour. She was honest in a way I wasn't prepared for. She said she had been uncomfortable during the toast. She said she had almost said something, had leaned forward, had looked at Daniel, had started to think about whether she should speak. And then she hadn't, because she didn't know if it was her place, and because the moment passed so quickly. She said, "I want you to know I am sorry I didn't say something in the room." I told her she had nothing to apologize for. I meant it. Then she told me something I hadn't known. She said that after the reception, on the drive back to the hotel, she had mentioned the toast to Daniel. She said Daniel had gone very quiet. She said he had told her that was not what he expected. That he and Claire had argued about it that night. I sat with that for a moment. Daniel had argued with Claire about it. Which meant Claire knew. Which meant she had heard what I heard from the same room, and she had responded differently than I might have expected. I didn't know yet what to do with that. I filed it away. 2 weeks after the wedding, I made a decision. I want to be precise about what the decision was, because I have thought about how to describe it many times, and I want to get it right. I did not decide to retaliate. I did not decide to embarrass my family, or to expose them, or to get even. Those were not the words I used, even to myself, because they were not the right words for what I was feeling. What I decided was this: I was going to stop carrying the silence alone. For years, for longer than I had consciously recognized, I had been the only person in my family's life who knew the full shape of what happened between us. My father had delivered his verdict about me in careful, measured language, in private conversations and in small public moments, and I had absorbed it. I had absorbed it quietly and gracefully and without complaint, because I had been taught that this was what a good daughter did. But there were people in my life who deserved to know the truth. Not to judge my family, not to prosecute anyone, but because they were close enough to me that they had, in some sense, been lied to by the story my family told about who I was. I reached out to 3 people. My closest friend, Rachel, who had been at the wedding. My father's sister, my Aunt Catherine, who had also been in the room. And Daniel. I sent each of them the recording. Not with a long message. Not with an explanation of what I wanted them to do with it. Just, I thought you should hear this clearly. And then I waited. Rachel called within 20 minutes of receiving it. She didn't start with "I'm sorry," which I appreciated. She started with, "I need to say something and I need you to hear me." She said, "I was at that wedding. I heard that toast in the room, in real time, and I thought I knew something was wrong with it, I felt it, but I couldn't name it fast enough." And hearing it again, on the recording, without the ambient noise, without the champagne glasses and the tablecloths and the social gravity of being in a wedding reception, hearing it as just his voice and his words, "Nora." That was not a toast. That was a public statement about who you are. And it was not kind. And it was not accidental. I sat on my couch while she talked and I felt something release in my chest. Slowly. Like something that had been held for a very long time being gently let go. She said, "You have been very fair to these people." It was such a simple sentence. I didn't trust myself to respond right away. I said, "I know. I think I know that now." Aunt Catherine called the following evening. She asked if she could come over. She drove an hour to sit across from me at my kitchen table. She brought a coffee cake she had made. She put it down on the counter without saying anything about it, and we both acted like it wasn't a thing she had done, and we sat down. She is my father's older sister. She has known him for 67 years. She is someone I trust to be honest precisely because she loves him, because she has no reason to exaggerate in my favor. She said, "I heard that toast in the room. I heard something wrong in it. And then I let it go. And I am sitting here now trying to understand why I did that." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Gerald has always needed someone to anchor the story. When you were children, and you were different from Claire, it became easier for him to understand himself as the father of the easier daughter. Not because he doesn't love you. I believe he loves you. But love and clarity are not the same thing." She looked at me. She said, "I've watched you work very hard, for a very long time, to be seen by someone who has already decided what he sees." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She had said the thing I had spent years circling without landing on. She said, "That is not your fault. And it is not your failure." We ate the coffee cake. We talked for 2 more hours. When she left, she hugged me for a long time at the door. Some things you understand the moment someone says them. Some things you understand slowly, over the days that follow, the words settling into you a little more each morning. That was one of the second kind. Daniel called 3 days after I sent it. He said, "I already knew." He said it quietly, in a way that told me he had been preparing to say it. He said, "I was standing at the front of the room during that toast, and Nora, I knew something was wrong, and I didn't know what to do about it in the moment, and I am sorry for that." He said, "Claire and I talked about it that night. I don't want to speak for her, but I want you to know that she heard it." And her response was not nothing. I thanked him for calling. I meant it. Before we hung up, he said one more thing. He said, "I want to understand my wife's family. The whole family. That includes you. Whatever is happening between you and your parents, I hope you know that doesn't change anything on my end. I stayed on that for a moment after we said goodbye. I thought, there are good people in this story. That matters. Then I thought about Claire. About what Daniel had said. That her response was not nothing. I wondered what that meant. I was going to find out. He called on a Thursday morning. I was at my desk when the phone rang, and I saw his name, and I sat with it for 2 rings before I answered. He said, I understand there's a recording going around. His voice was controlled. Not angry, controlled. The same tone he had used at the wedding. Measured. Practiced. I said, yes. He said, I want you to understand that everything I said at that wedding, I said because I love you. I said it because I am your father, and I worry about you, and sometimes the way I express that doesn't land the way I intend. I waited. He said, I don't think it was fair of you to share something private. I said, it was said in front of 200 people. In a microphone. At a wedding. He didn't respond to that directly. He moved on. He said he hoped we could talk more when things had settled. He said he and my mother cared about me. My mother's voice came in briefly from somewhere behind him. I couldn't make out the words, just the sound of it, and then he said he had to go. He said, goodbye, Nora. I said, goodbye, Dad. I didn't hang up in anger. I said goodbye in exactly the same tone I always used. And then I set the phone on the desk, and I went to the window, and I looked at the street outside for a moment. He had not apologized. He had reframed. I had known that was possible. I had prepared for it. But knowing something is possible and experiencing it are different things, and it took me a few minutes before I was ready to go back to work. Claire called on a Sunday afternoon, about 3 weeks after the wedding. I had thought about this call many times in the days leading up to it. I had rehearsed different versions of it, different ways Claire might open, different things she might say, different ways the conversation might go. I had rehearsed myself being cold, being gracious, being measured. I had rehearsed walking away from it unchanged. I was not prepared for what she actually said. She started with, I am sorry. And then she stopped. Like, she wanted the words to arrive before anything else came. She said, I didn't hear all of the toast. I was looking at Daniel during most of it, and there was a lot of noise in my head that day. But I heard some of it. And then Daniel played me the recording. And Nora, I listened to it 3 times. I didn't say anything. I let her keep going. She said, I don't know when it happened. I don't know at what point I became the version of me that they talked about when they talked about what a daughter should be. But I know that I did. And I know that meant something for you. And I spent a long time telling myself it wasn't my fault because I didn't make them do anything. She paused. She said, but I also didn't do anything to change it. And that is not the same as being innocent. I thought about that sentence for a long time afterward. We talked for a while. Not easily. There were moments where neither of us knew what to say, and we let those moments be. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't try to explain our parents or defend them or contextualize what had happened. She just said what she had actually experienced, as clearly as she could, and she let me respond or not respond. I said, I don't know what this looks like from here. I don't know how we do this, given everything. She said, I don't know either. I just know I want to try. It wasn't a resolution. It was a beginning. The kind that feels uncertain and a little fragile and also, somehow, more real than any version of it would have been if it had come easily. I said, okay, let's try. Several months have passed now. I want to tell you where things are as honestly as I can. My parents and I are not estranged. But we are not what we were. Which is to say, we are not pretending anymore, and that is a significant change. I speak to my mother occasionally. Our conversations are careful and shorter than they used to be. My father and I have not spoken since the Thursday morning phone call. I don't know exactly when that will change. I am not in a hurry to force it. There is grief in that. I want to name that plainly, because sometimes when people talk about putting distance between themselves and their family, it gets described as liberation, as freedom, and those things are true, but they are not the whole truth. There is also loss. There is the loss of the version of the relationship you wanted it to be, and the particular exhaustion of finally accepting that it was never going to get there on its own. I am still working through that. Aunt Catherine and I have talked several times since she came over. She has become something different in my life than she was before, more present, more honest. She is not choosing sides. She loves her brother. But she is also someone who looked at the truth when it was put in front of her and didn't look away. Meg and I stayed in touch. I did not expect that, but I am grateful for it. She is perceptive and direct, and she has a gift for saying the thing that is true without making it cruel. I think Daniel found someone with good instincts. Claire and I have had 4 or 5 conversations since the wedding. Real ones, not the kind of conversation we used to have, where the goal was to get through the meal without anything going wrong. The kind where we say things and then wait to see what the other person does with them. It is slow. It is sometimes uncomfortable. It is, I think, the beginning of something that might actually hold weight. Daniel reached out once more, about a month after we spoke. He said he wanted me to know I was welcome at their home. That the invitation was not conditional. That whatever happened between me and my parents was my business, and my relationship with Claire and with him was its own thing if I wanted it. I said I wanted it. I meant it. There is something I keep coming back to, and I want to try to say it clearly. For most of my adult life, I understood myself as the difficult one. The one who left. The one who made things complicated. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because I had been told, in ways large and small, that my way of moving through the world was a problem to be managed. After that wedding, after the recording, after all the conversations that followed, I started to understand something different. A family needs to have a story about itself. It needs a shape, a set of values it believes it holds, a sense of what makes it good. And sometimes, to protect that story, a family needs someone to be the contrast. Someone who is the example of what the family does not stand for. Someone whose choices exist to make other choices look more deliberate, more correct, more worthy of pride. I was that person in my family. I was the contrast. That was not because I was difficult. That was because someone needed to occupy that role, and I was the one who fit. The difference between those two explanations is not small. It took me a long time to see it. I am not the family disgrace. I never was. I was just the one who didn't make it easy for them to believe what they needed to believe. And I have spent a long time paying for that, in ways I am only now beginning to fully understand. I think about Meg, in that reception hall, pressing record on her phone. Not because she suspected anything. Not because she was setting up a plan. Just because she wanted to send Daniel's cousin something to remember the day. And in doing that, in the ordinary, thoughtful act of trying to include people who weren't there, she handed me something I didn't know I needed. A witness. A record. The truth in someone else's hands, in a form I couldn't talk myself out of. I live in my own apartment now. I've lived alone for years, and most evenings, that apartment is very quiet. I make dinner. I read. I talk to Rachel or Meg or sometimes Claire. It is a small life measured in ordinary ways. But it is mine. Chosen. Built by my own hand. And I stopped, some time ago, being ashamed of that. Thank you for being here, and for staying with me through this one. This story was not easy to tell, but I am glad it is told now. If you're listening to this, and you recognize something in it, if you know what it feels like to carry a version of yourself that someone else made, to show up for people who have already decided what they think of you, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me what that felt like. Tell me where you are in it. And if this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone who might need to hear it, please share it with them. That is always the reason we tell these stories. Not for us. For the person on the other end, who needed to know they were not alone. Like this video if you want more like it. Subscribe if you want to stay. And drop your city and the time below. I love knowing where in the world you are tonight. I'll see you in the next one.